and here we want to solve proportions. So in this case, we're going to end up with quadratic equations when we do our means and extremes multiplication. So then we have to factor these and then get two possible solutions for these proportions. So we're still going to do the means and the extremes. So for this example here, our extremes are going to be the binomial of m plus 3 times m minus 4, and that is going to be equal to 4 times 11. So when we go ahead and do this multiplication, we end up with m times m is m squared, and m times negative 4 is negative 4m. And then we have 3 times m, which is plus 3m, and 3 times negative 4, which is negative 12. And that is going to still be equal to 11 times 4, which is 44. Now, when we have a quadratic equation, in order to factor it, we need to have one side equal to 0. So we are going to subtract 44 from both sides. I guess before we do that, we should combine like terms. So we have a negative 4m and a 3m. So that's going to be m squared. Negative 4 plus 3 is going to be negative 1m, and then minus 12. And that is still going to be equal to 44. Then we need to get 0 on one side because this is a quadratic because m squared. So we're going to subtract 44 from both sides of the equal sign. And our 44's cancel. And we're left with m squared minus 1m. And then we're going to say minus 56. And that's going to be equal to 0. Now, when we do our factoring, I always put my two binomial parentheses down. And I know that I have m squared here, so this has to be m times m, because that's the only thing that's going to be m squared, m times m. Now I need two numbers that are going to multiply to negative 56 and add to negative 1. Well, two numbers that I know multiply to 56. I'm not going to pay attention to the sign just yet. But two numbers that I know are going to be 7 and 8. Now, 7 times 8 is positive 56. I need to make it negative. So one of these has to be negative. And they also have to add to negative 1. So because it's negative 1, the bigger value needs to be negative. So this has to be negative 8 and positive 7. And that's still equal to 0. And then the actual solution to this is the zero product property, or what would make this whole thing 0. Because 0 times anything is always 0. So what would make that value 0? What would m have to be in order to make that binomial value 0? We already have negative 8. So m, in this case, will have to be 8. Eight minus 8 is 0. So when that's 0, 0 times anything is 0. We'll also do the same thing here. What would m have to be in this situation in order to make this binomial 0? And in this case, it's going to be m equals negative 7. So these are the two possible solutions for number 9. Looking at number 10, very similar process. So we're going to do our means and extremes still. So our extremes are k plus 8 times k minus 2, and that's still going to be equal to our means, which in this case are going to be 8 times 3. And we have to do the same thing that we did before. K times k is k squared. K times negative 2 is negative 2k. Eight times k is 8k. And 8 times negative 2 is negative 16. And that is still equal to 24. Again, we have like terms. We have a negative 2k and a positive 8k. And those two add together to get to positive 6k. So k squared comes down, plus 6k minus 16, and that is still equal to 24. Again, this is a quadratic function, so we have to have 0 on one side of the equation. So I'm going to subtract 24. And the reason we subtracted 24 is because the right side is going to be equal to 0, which is what we want. And the left side is going to be equal to k squared plus 6. This is supposed to be a k. Plus 6k minus 40. So again, I'm going to put down my binomials, my binomial parentheses, because we're going to factor this. And that's still going to be equal to 0. So the only thing that's going to multiply to k squared is going to be k and k. Then we need two things that multiply to 40 and add to 6, or multiply to negative 40 and add to positive 6. And that's going to be 10 and 4. So now we can, because it's negative, one of them has to be positive, one of them has to be negative. And we have a positive 6, so the bigger value has to be positive. So in this case, we're going to get plus 10 and minus 4. And then we have, remember, what would make this green binomial 0? And that would be if k were equal to 4. And what would make this blue binomial 0? That would be if k were equal to negative 10. We have two more examples that have to do with quadratic proportions that end up with quadratics in them. So again, we're going to do the means and extremes. I'll do this one a little bit quicker. So 3 times 5, and that's still going to be equal to our means, which in this case are going to be x to the 4 plus 4 and x plus 2. So on the left side, that's pretty straightforward. 3 times 5 is 15, and that's going to be equal to x times x is x squared. X times 2 is 2x. 4 times x is 4x, and 4 times 2 is 8. We can combine some like terms here. So we have x squared plus 6x plus 8, and that is equal to 15. We need to get 0 on one side, so we're going to subtract 15. And on the left side, we get 0. And on the right side, we get x squared plus 6x minus 7. And the only thing to multiply to negative 7, so this one's going to be pretty straightforward. So the only thing to multiply to x is going to be x and x. And the only thing to multiply to 7 has to be 7 and 1. But again, we have a negative 7 and a positive 6. So one of them has to be negative, but this time the bigger number has to be positive. So it's going to be minus 1 and plus 7. That's going to be equal to 0. And then whatever would make this 0 is going to be one of the values. So in this case, it's going to be x is equal to negative 7. And in this case, it would be x is equal to 1. So those are the two solutions for number 12. Another example, we have our extremes, which is going to be n plus 4 and n minus 2. And that's going to be equal to our means, which is going to be 3 times negative 3. On the left side, we get n squared minus 2n. And then we get plus 4n minus 8. And that is going to be equal to negative 9. And we can combine like terms. So we get n squared plus 2n minus 8 is equal to negative 9. Then we want to add 9 to both sides because we want one side to be equal to 0. So then we get n squared plus 2n plus 1 is equal to 0. And then we have to factor it. So we get our two binomials, still going to be equal to 0. Only things that multiply to n squared are going to be n and n. Only thing to multiply to 1 is 1 and 1. And because both signs are positive, both signs here have to be positive. What would make this green binomial 0? That's going to be n is equal to negative 1. And what would make this blue or light blue? That's going to be the same thing. N is equal to negative 1.